Thank you for joining us for the first of our webinar series, our autumn webinar series. I'm Emily Townsend, I'm president of LCANZ, and I will be your host for today. Before we kick into the main details, we've got a really exciting program coming up over the next few months. You can see the webinars that we've already got booked in and confirmed dates for. Registrations are open for all of those, and we're finalizing a few more dates and speakers. So keep an eye on our social media, check out our website if you want to register and to see any more details. I'm delighted to welcome Juhi Shareef. Unfortunately, Teina has had to pull out at the very last moment. She sent her apologies and unavoidable circumstances. But Juhi and Teina collaborated on the development of the Te Reo Maori donut, Te Takarangi, and I will hand over to Juhi to tell us all about it.
Kia ora koutou. Ko pahara te maunga, ko Thames te awa, ko Han te iwi, ko Juhi toko ingoa. Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Thanks Emily for inviting me. So I am going to be talking to you about Te Takarangi, and I'm going to share my screen. We've got a lot to cover in 20 minutes, and I thought we'd kick off with a quote from Kate Raworth, who is a fantastic economist, who will be kind of hearing about her creation of the Doughnut Economic Model, which some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with. Really, you know, she's just saying that we need to meet the needs of all within the means of our planet. I'll also be talking on Teina's behalf about the importance, in our view, about understanding our local context here in Aotearoa, and the Māori Indigenous perspective as we create new frameworks for sustainability. So I'll talk very briefly about our current context and why, in my view, sustainability just doesn't cut it these days, and how the Doughnut Economic Model is really helpful in understanding our social and environmental context. And then I'll talk a bit about Te Takarangi, which is our interpretation of that. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because I am assuming that a lot of you watching this are experts in sustainability, or at least have some understanding of it. So you'll be aware that there's been a new IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, in the last 24 hours, talking about we have 8 years left, and you know, we will lose 30% of our biodiversity if global heating hits 3 degrees hotter, and you know, based on pre-industrial levels, etc., etc. We all know that we have got massive challenges, and you know, with our current political context of looking at what's happening, the awful stuff that's happening in the Ukraine, it's very easy to put these other things out of mind. But of course, those of us who are practitioners in sustainability have to keep these other waves in our minds, you know, so, you know, climate change, biodiversity collapse, etc. You may be familiar with this model of kind of the Hothouse Earth from Rockstrom et al. And I like talking to this because it really shows that the Earth was on a trajectory, and it's kind of dipped into this trough, and it's headed towards Hothouse Earth. And in fact, in order for us to get the planet stabilized, it's going to take quite a lot of energy and focused concentration to actually move the planet back onto that stable trajectory. And it can tip quite easily back into that hothouse scenario if we're not careful. So, you know, all of this is to say that we've got this massive kind of environmental challenge, and of course, huge social challenges as well. And that leads me to talk about why sustainability isn't enough. So I've been working in sustainability, I don't know, about 17 years or something like that. And frankly, if Greta Thunberg was my client and that generation, I think, you know, I failed, because the incremental sustainability and the frameworks that apply to corporations that I was taught and that I've been implementing are just simply not fit for purpose. They're not moving fast enough. We need systems change, and we need new models to help us to do that. And so a couple of views of the journey to sustainability. One of them is this one. So this is from the Regenesis group. And this is looking at, from the left side of the screen, a conventional development, and everyone's kind of aiming for sustainable. And a lot of the language around this is kind of, we need to do less bad, right? So we need to reduce our footprint, we need to reduce our waste, we need to get to zero. And getting to zero may be inspiring for some, but it doesn't particularly inspire me, because what I have recognized is that once we get to sustainable, we're still probably using, planet and a half's worth of resources, and we actually need to restore and regenerate our environments. And not just our environments, but we really need to rebuild our communities as well. And this is just another way of looking at this. This is from Bill Reed, a very kind of similar model. So to say that this idea of moving to sustainable as this kind of neutral point is kind of gaining in popularity, that, and the fact that we actually need to go beyond sustainability to restore our environment and become regenerative. But how do we do that, right? If the tools and frameworks we've been using today haven't worked so far, what do we do? I am Chief Responsibility Officer at a tourism company called Tourism Holdings. And at THL, we use something called the Future Fit Business Benchmark. And, I've come across lots and lots of frameworks in my time. And this is the first framework for me that actually helps a business to go on a science-based journey to sustainable and then regenerative. So it offers 23 goals called the Future Fit goals to get to that break-even point, and then 24 goals known as positive pursuits to take businesses on the journey beyond sustainability to become regenerative. And it takes a systems approach. So it reflects the evolution, I think, of sustainability, and it is driving that kind of systems approach. Because if you think about what we were doing 10, 15, 20 years ago, business was, environment and society were externalities. They were separate from, business. And then the middle diagram of this, this kind of Venn diagram here, is what I was taught. And this was about kind of shared value, about that fantastic intersection, that nexus between business, environment, and society, and how we could get to this wonderfully balanced place if we just, implemented the right systems. That actually has evolved to this idea of system value, where we recognize that business is part of society, which is a human construct, and that in itself is reliant on our ecosystems. Whereas the shared value model, businesses could still get away with their core business being frankly unsustainable, and then, doing a bit of charity work or doing an initiative that was quite good on the side. I think, for example, of some of the tobacco companies who've got fantastic environmental records. They've got every ISO, 14001, etc. But actually their core product kills people, as an example. So the Future Fit Business Benchmark actually helps you to look at your core business as well, which is what I really like. And so what I was doing when I first came to New Zealand was I was doing a lot of work around circular economy. And one of the things that I realized was in circular economy, essentially designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. One of the most important things was that we needed to understand our local context. And why do we need to do that? Well, I started getting a little bit concerned about circular solutions, that they can just end up benefiting, wealthy corporations and individuals, frankly. So, there's some great circular businesses like Mud Jeans in the Netherlands, often used as an example, where their lease they're leasing jeans, right? So, you know, you want the latest fashion, you don't have to buy a pair of jeans, you can just lease it for the month and change it, etc., which is really interesting. But, you know, how does that, you know, impact the supply chain, or how does that impact the local community? And how does that consider the wider environmental context? So I was really grappling with this, and I thought, well, what is a good model that the circular economy should sit within? And then, of course, I came across a Doughnut Economic Model by Kate Raworth. And many of you will be familiar with this. I won't go into detail because I believe that the next webinar is going to be with Kate Mayer from the Planetary Accounting Network, and she will go into detail, I'm sure. So but I'll just kind of cover the key principles for those of you who are less familiar. There's a donut. The Doughnut Economic Model is shaped like a donut with a hole in it. So the central ring is a social foundation. So that is, you know, key for humanity. So those are all of the social sustainable development goals in there, like health and education, etc. And the outer ring is the ecological ceiling. So those are the 9 planetary boundaries that we need to make sure we don't overshoot. Unfortunately, we've overshot 4 of them, and we have a shortfall in a number of areas. And the good thing about this model is that, as Kate will elaborate, I'm sure, is that you can start quantifying the impacts more locally. So there's a Leeds University website, for example, where you can compare different countries, so New Zealand and India, for example. And you can actually then start developing a budget from that, which is the work that Kate's been doing. So again, I'm not going to go into all of this detail, but suffice to say that there is a lot of information out there. And for me, this is a really useful context, right? So it's kind of like the circular economy helps to grow that green space in the middle, which is great. But then as I was thinking about the circular economy for Aotearoa, I was thinking, well, you know, I suppose I have a perspective as a British Indian, right? That my parents are from India and Pakistan, and my entire whakapapa, my history has been shaped by colonialism, right? So somebody drew a line on a map and then created 2 countries, and I never really considered the implications of that until I moved to New Zealand, and until I started working more with mana whenua and understanding colonialism and the process of decolonization of, you know, our thinking. And I thought, you know, I started to see this kind of stream of experts coming in from Europe, you know, with like the Great White Hope coming into New Zealand with the latest sustainability framework, and this is really good, and everyone go, wow, and then they'd leave, and then everyone will forget. I was thinking, what can we do that will make this work more rooted here? And how do I need to think about it as a newcomer to New Zealand? And what can I offer that will be of service, right? And so I was thinking, if we talk about Doughnut Economics, and Kate Raworth came and spoke here, surely it needs to be interpreted by, well, have an Indigenous interpretation, so have a Māori kind of perspective of it. And that's really how I came to work with Dr. Teina Boasa-Dean on the Takarangi. So Te Takarangi is not the Te Reo word for donut. It in fact means spiral. And I'm going to just kind of pop out of this for a second and let me know if you can see this. I just think it's really rather beautiful. I came across this.
Perfect.
That is, can you see that now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's many interpretations of Te Takarangi, and you will see this spiral on in marae and all over the place, and it is the depiction of rangi and papa, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but I just wanted you to see the various depictions of that as I kind of explain this a bit more thoroughly. I approached Teina Boasa-Dean to reimagine and translate the donut into Te Reo. And we used a designer, Tinika of Pacific Island descent, to design it. And so Teina translated it into Te Reo, and I thought, well, this is wonderful, because instead of ecological ceiling, she offered the phrase Hatoa Matangi, which is the planet's last breath. And I thought that was so evocative about how, just even through that translation to Te Reo and then back to English, how much more evocative it was, rather than ecological ceiling or planetary boundary, right? So I found it just wonderful to look at things from a different perspective. But Teina went a step further, and she said, you know, Juhi, this isn't the Maori worldview. And she said, for us, society is not the foundation; the environment is the foundation. And so she flipped the two rings and put the environment at the heart of this image. And I was initially quite confronted by this, because I was like, well, how are we going to compare the metrics with Cape Wayworth Doughnut? And I slept on it, and I thought, my gosh, well, it's really simply kind of not my worldview, but it is absolutely valid, and there is real richness to be had when you actually have that discussion about these two different perspectives, a kind of Pākehā Western view and a Maori view. And just to note that Teina does not speak for all Maori. She's from the Tūhoe tribe, and she doesn't claim to represent all iwi by any means. So this is her reimagining, with the environment at the heart of this. And also she embedded it, and you can see this gray and white spiral, which is Te Takarangi. And what she said was that this is a much more dynamic approach, rather than a really static circle, right? That actually things are constantly changing, and that there's an interplay going on here. And so for me, I found the whole process was just a fascinating learning experience. And Teina went on to kind of talk about the different elements of Te Takarangi. I won't go into this, because I'll share the slides afterwards, and do have a look. But she was again talking about the intersecting spirals, but also the kind of space at the center of the spiral, how it shows that we have to drive energy back into the hearts of our communities, etc. And I mentioned that you'll see Te Takarangi in, on Wakatoa, these war canoes and marae, etc. Really, what she was talking to us about was how, if you can interpret Te Takarangi through a Maori ora, a wellness, a well-being lens, it will help to kind of explain the principles behind them. So what do I mean by that? So if you can see, like on the right side of the screen, you've got the elements of Te Takarangi that I was talking about, the kind of the beaded intervals, the spaces between the two spirals. And if you look through that lens, Teina kind of explained, and you'll possibly be familiar with a number of these Maori ora elements like whakapapa, tikanga, etc. And then from that, there is a lot of application to, firstly, to kind of feeding back into that model, but also to this idea of regenerative communities. And again, I'm not going to go into the details about this, but just to say, kind of, we really started to unpack the different principles and what the significance was, using the Takarangi almost as a values-based compass, and then what the application was of that to regenerative communities. And of course, she would be able to explain it in a much more eloquent way. So hopefully she'll be able to do that for you another time. And look, we kind of put this out as a Project Moonshot blog and podcast. And it went viral as much as a sustainability thing goes viral. And we're really delighted that Simon Wilson picked it up. He wrote an essay series in the Herald about Why I'm Afraid. And his last piece was on a reason to hope. And as you can see, Teina's kind of interpretation of Te Takarangi was featured there, which was great. For us, if we talk about Te Takarangi as that values-based compass, it has actually been used by the Ministry for the Environment as a basis for their work looking at the new national waste strategy. And not that I absolutely kind of like put a bit of distance between what the strategy is actually going to end up looking like and the initial important discussions with the Māori Raupu, the leadership group that they had. But it's great to see that this kind of tool for context is starting to get picked up and used. And a project Moonshot, which I started with my partner Preeti Ambani during the first lockdown, as a kind of investigation into kind of regenerative cities, really. We kind of launched this, and then we thought, well, what do we need that would really actually help, you know, in a practical sense? You know, what do businesses and policymakers need that can help to explore this context a bit further? And so we thought, well, if we have a compass, we need a map. And so we have created, with this fantastic team of Moonshot activators who volunteered their time and energy and mahi, we've created the Moonshot Map, which you can find on our website at projectmoonshot.city. And look, it's very beta. It's not flashy at all. It's you know, it's just kind of an initial exploration of what are the circular and regenerative businesses and projects and initiatives across Aotearoa. And there's loads of gaps at this point, right? So there's a lot we need to fill out, but we've got over about 100 projects covering a number of different industries. And you'll see sort of kind of, if you click on one, it's got some images, it's got some tags, which I'll talk about in a second, a bit of detail and who the founder curator was who initially came across that project. And the tags that we've got are based initially on an Ellen MacArthur framework set of tags about kind of what are the characteristics of a circular business. And we've drawn from donut thinking, if you like, to add some additional tags to these. And there's more information about this on the website. But we didn't just want to say that this project is a circular economy project, you know, because it's kind of meaningless. Like, how is it circular? You know, is it closing the loop through product stewardship? Is it part of the sharing economy? But does it reflect place-based innovation, which is what this map is really all about? So I know I've covered an awful lot of ground, introduced a lot of concepts, and you know, I'm really happy to answer any questions and any challenges that you have. But just to finish off, it'd be fantastic if you could actually visit the map and give us your thoughts and submit some projects for consideration to be included on it. That's it for me.
Juhi, thank you. That was fabulous. That was fascinating insight. As you said, you've covered a huge amount of ground in a short amount of time, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate that full view of things. And yeah, I was about to ask how the LCA community can support, but I think you've just told us. Go and visit. And in terms of, I guess, how do we submit things if we have projects that are relevant?
Yeah, well, there's a form on the map. It's a Google form, and it should take about 3 to 5 minutes, I think, to fill it out. I should say that not all projects will necessarily make it onto the map. We're trying to retain a little bit of academic rigor around it. And so we're looking for those projects and businesses that are not just sustainable, but those that are really in the transition to, a better system, if you like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So we have some questions coming through. So I'll run through and pick some out. So from Sarvesh, and I think this is relating to what you talked about earlier on, is the problem accepting the sustainability models or getting experts to agree on the sustainability models, given that, as you've said, there's quite a few. There's a follow-up question, but I might pause and let you respond to that one first.
Oh, I've got a really simple response to that, which is a great question. I just can't. I've got framework fatigue. Okay, I'm over all the frameworks and the models and the this and that. I'm like, I think Future Fit is a good one, but frankly, I think we just need to focus on action. I think the time for frameworks and models is I mean, they're still useful, but it's one of the reasons why we did the map, is that we actually wanted to say, you know, to actually support people in their decision making, and taking action.
So Lindsay Wood has asked, well, he's first said thank you, but he's asked, your talk brought to mind Tim Jackson, Prosperity Without Growth, and who spoke at a webinar at Victoria University last year, highlighted that business should be thinking of providing service and not making profit. And you then posed, what can I offer of service and arriving in New Zealand? So could you expand on the relationship between the service and the concepts that you've been describing?
Yes, I mean, I should be really clear that, look, I'm on the exec team of a limited company, right? And THL is very much interested in making profit, particularly as a tourism business, but within the context of making sure that it is not at the expense of people and planet. And again, from a THL perspective, our core business is RVs, which pollute the planet, right? And so we are really focused. We've got a future fleet program, really focused on how quickly we can decarbonize our fleet. So I just want to be clear that this is not about me saying don't make a profit, right? What I'm saying is, on a personal note, I was saying, you know, outside of my day job, how can I be of service to my new homeland? And that's the distinction that I would make.
One question, and unfortunately the name is a combination of letters and numbers, so I can't tell you what it is, but they've asked if they can submit PhD research projects to Moonshot.
Yes, absolutely. And look, we've got a particular, like, we note if a project is research or if it's a prototype, because we are aware that, you know, we don't want to mislead people by making people think that things are more mature than they are. Frankly, we are at very early stages of regenerative thinking here in Aotearoa. So, but we'd absolutely welcome, you know, any and all projects to consider to put on the map. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I guess on a similar basis, does it help if we share, you know, on LinkedIn and stuff, or would you prefer that more specialist people find it, if that makes sense?
Well, it's actually, it's a really good question. We are literally, I think over the next few days, we'll be launching on LinkedIn. And so if I can tag Emily, for example, and Kate, it would be great if you can spread the word. We are keeping things on quite a down low, like we'd rather take action and understand, kind of get some benefit out of using it rather than kind of do a big splashy PR. This is something that I'm doing in my own time with THL's blessing and with a lot of people collaborating on it. So, but yeah, would really love it if you shared it when we launch in the next few days.
Wonderful, perfect timing. Thanks. A question from Alistair, wondering how MUD, the Netherlands-based jeans company, would go about changing their circular economy model and begin applying the Te Takarangi approach.
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because the Netherlands, businesses in the Netherlands seem to be kind of leading on the circular economy. Like there's, it's really taken off there. And not only that, Amsterdam was the first city to actually publicly align to Doughnut economic principles. So there is a methodology for cities based on the Doughnut, where some of the questions are asked, like, you know, what would make this a thriving city, right? So it's not about how can we do less bad, but how can we do more good? And that is already quite forward thinking from a city, I would say. And that will necessarily kind of impact, I should say, the businesses that are operating there. I can't speak specifically to MUD because I don't know their business model well enough, and I wouldn't presume to. However, it's just thinking about the social and environmental context, not just in which you operate, but also thinking about your entire value chain, so your supply chain, etc. I think is a really important piece. So it's not just about making the product, but the good you can do for local communities and your environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's we'll talk more about how we enumerate some of those things next week with Kate, but with LCA, we're very focused on environment, but just by the nature of the tools that are available and the systems that have been developed so far. And I guess I suppose the social side of things can come in at a corporate level as well. It doesn't have to be directly tied to the product, but a question from Kate on that. Actually, it's more of a comment. She is totally with you on prioritizing action and finds a lot of people struggle to identify what action they could take. So it does turn into a question. Would love if you could share your recommendations from everyone here on how to go about taking action today, this month, this year.
It's a good question. I think for me, this time is, if you're working in a business or part of a business, I would absolutely turn your attention to the core business model. You know, there is no business that is without impact. And even if you're a digital business, you have a hell of a footprint with your servers, etc. And I think that the time for that, you know, I was just thinking about moving from that shared value model to a systems model. I think the time has come for us to look at the core business that we're doing and how we can influence that and what's in our control, for example, around procurement, right? That's going to be a key area. I think the other point is that everything absolutely has to have a carbon lens on it. You know, climate change is a critical priority. It's a planetary boundary that I don't know if we can come back from. So I would advise that. And the other thing is, in terms of taking action, just do something. It doesn't really matter, you know, how big, how small. It doesn't have to be flashy. Just take some action, whatever you can do. Just, you know, I think the time is to, like, now that we can get on with it. And I'd just say, by looking at things like the Moonshot Map, you can see who else in your area is on a similar journey, and you might want to reach out to them.
I have another question here for you. There is Lina is asking, can you please elaborate if there is or what is the relationship between LCA, life cycle assessment, and Doughnut Economics?
Well, Lina, look, I'm absolutely not an LCA expert, right? We have used it at THL looking at our vehicles, for example. And so for me, it's very much a kind of, an LCA is a decision support tool for me to make good decisions about the products in my business, right? For me, the Doughnut and Takarangi is a kind of much more macro perspective on your context as a bigger business. I hope that makes sense, you know, so that kind of like products are necessarily part of that, or maybe buildings or whatever you're applying it to. But for me, it's like, are you, you know, when you are making your changes, are you involving the stakeholders that need to be involved? Are you grounding it in your place? Are you thinking about the ecosystems impacted and how you can regenerate those?
I wasn't suggesting to scrap profits, but more the Kaizen approach of getting quality service right and profits will follow. Any comments on that?
Yes, look, I absolutely think that if you are, you know, if your business model is to be of service, and that means purpose-led, and if you can get your service right, then I think that you're onto a winner for sure. I agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Juhi, so much, and thank you for stepping in, and thank you everyone for attending. So please do check our website for details of the next webinars. Make sure that you sign up and register, and as we said, there'll be more that are coming out soon, or more will be confirmed soon. So keep an eye on social media, keep an eye on your emails, keep an eye on the website, and yeah, thank you so much to everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Juhi.
Bye.